Okay, I think we'll make a start. Thank you very much for everyone who has joined. Just a couple of housekeeping points to start with. This session will be recorded and it will be available to watch on the InnoScot YouTube channel after the event. At the end of the webinar, we will share a link to get feedback from you, and we'd really appreciate your comments, feedbacks, and any ideas for future topics you would like us to address. At the end, we'll have time for questions. We've left quite a large portion of this webinar to address any of your issues. So if there's anything you would like to ask, please put it into the question and answer section on Teams. So I'm Elaine Gemmell. I'm Head of Regulatory Affairs at InnoScot Health. And as part of this series of webinars, in May last year, we delivered Preparing for Regulatory Change Across the Medical Device Landscape. This looked at the innovation landscape in Scotland and in particular where to seek support, practical advice and how to navigate the regulatory pathway. Today, we're going to look at the regulatory framework from the point of view of a notified body, which for me, and I hope for you, will be really interesting to see this from a completely different perspective. I'm really pleased to be joined by representatives from our notified body, BSI, and I hope that you'll take advantage of their expertise and knowledge. When we have the question and answer session at the end of the presentation, I hope you'll all take the opportunity to pick their brains. So just to introduce our colleagues, Umar is the Business Development Manager, responsible for facilitating the initiation of clients' medical device certification journeys by guiding them through the application and proposal phases. And Damon is the Sales Manager for BSI Regulatory Services, UK and Ireland, and he manages the commercial team to support new and existing BSI clients navigate the regulatory landscape and achieve certification. With 20 years in the medical device industry and 12 years regulatory experience with BSI, he's helped hundreds of startups and SMEs gain certification and start selling devices in the UK and Europe. So I'm just going to set the scene, if you don't mind, just to have a quick recap about where we currently are. We've talked about the regulatory landscape for medical devices over the last few years, and as it stands today, the United Kingdom, excluding Northern Ireland, has not changed the regulatory framework for medical devices and still works to the Medical Device Regulation 2002, while Europe has transitioned to the Medical Device Regulation 2017-745 in May 2021. The reason we've got different legislation is due to the combination of Brexit and the delay in implementing the MDR due to COVID. To address the issues of having a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland currently operates to European legislation. UK will implement new medical device regulations, and these are expected to come into force in 2025, and we will hear more about this during the course of the webinar. There is an important deadline coming up for manufacturers with legacy devices. Legacy devices are devices that have been CE marked to the Medical Device Directive. Regulation EU 2023/607 sets out transitional provisions to allow these devices to remain in the market if certain conditions are met. The first criteria is to have an MDR compliant quality management system and to lodge an application with a notified body for MDR assessment. For legacy devices to remain on the market, this must be completed by May 2024, so the clock is ticking. I'd like to briefly discuss where we are with future UK regulations and the actions taken by MHRA to date. The format for future medical device regulations was outlined in the government response to the 2021 consultation on future regulation of medical devices in the UK. The Software and AI as a Medical Device Change Programme was published, and it outlines 11 work packages across 2 work streams. The first stream contains 8 work packages to make key reforms across the software as a medical device lifecycle, and the second stream has 3 work packages and considers the challenges AI in a medical device can pose over traditional software. Transitional arrangements have been put in place to extend the acceptance of CE-marked medical devices in the Great Britain market, and this is intended to ensure continuity of supply and ease of transition to the future regulatory framework for medical devices. WTO published notification of the draft post-market surveillance requirements in July 2023, providing manufacturers with early notice of the intended legislative changes. This includes details of what must be included in a PMS, methods for collecting data, enhanced serious incidence reporting, and more stringent requirements for periodic reviews of their PMS data. The Innovative Device Access Pathway, or IDAP, pilot is designed to accelerate the development of innovative medical devices that meet unmet clinical needs in the NHS and support their integration into the UK market. Today, as part of this pilot, 8 medical devices have been selected to pilot this programme. Under the terms of the Windsor Agreement, the rules for placing medical devices in the Northern Ireland market differ slightly from those applicable to Great Britain. While the IVDR regulation has been implemented in Northern Ireland since May 2022, Medical Devices in Vitro Diagnostics Amendment Regulation came into force on the 21st of March 2024, so it's hot off the press, and it introduces provisions required for implementing the IVDR in Northern Ireland. Designation of approved bodies is ongoing, and to date, in addition to BSI, there are now 9 approved designated bodies in the UK. Guidance has been produced for software as a medical device, and in particular, the ones that are currently available are crafting an intended purpose, reporting adverse incidents, and predetermined change control plans, principles for developers. Moving on to the planned activities for 2024 and 2025, leading up to the implementation of the new regulation, the roadmap towards future regulatory framework for medical devices was published in January 2024, and it sets out the intended timescales for delivery of future core regulations. These regulations will be delivered through 4 statutory instruments. It's intended that the priority measures to enhance post-market surveillance will be put in place first, and then core elements of the new framework are expected to be in place during 2025. During the first half of 2024, there'll be stakeholder discussions on the future core regulations and updates to guidance. As usual, the devil is always in the detail, and I would draw your attention to the small print that the current timeline does not take account of the impact of any general election. So again, we need to watch this space. Just before I hand over to Damon, I'll be very presumptive and give an overview of where the notified body sits in the regulatory landscape. They may well go on to correct me, but a notified body is an organisation designated by an EU country to assess the conformity of certain products before being placed in the market. They carry out tasks related to the conformity assessment procedures set out in the applicable legislation when a third party is required. An approved body is the UK equivalent, and it's an organisation that's been designated by MHRA to assess whether manufacturers and their medical devices meet the requirements set out in the Medical Device Regulations 2002. The approved or notified body's engagement will depend on the classification of the device and the conformity assessment route a manufacturer has chosen. The conformity assessment routes are set out in annexes of the Medical Device Directive and the Medical Device Regulation. And the most common one I've seen to date is the full quality assurance route, where the notified body or approved body will examine both the quality management system and the technical file relating to the device. So, having set the scene, I will now hand over to Damon, who will cover these aspects in more detail from the perspective of a notified body.
Yeah, thanks, Elaine, and hello everybody. I can't see anyone, but I assume you're all there listening to me, so I'll jump into my presentation and obviously take questions at the end. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so if somebody could just The slides are up and ready to go, and then we'll get on. Okay.
Damon, you've just got the presenter slides on.
Okay, let me swap that over then. Better?
Great.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm Damon Williams, as mentioned, and joined by my colleague Umar, and between us we're part of the commercial team in the UK, looking at helping new and existing clients, through the regulatory landscape. And things are always changing, maybe not quickly, but it does change on a regular basis, and we're in the middle of quite a few changes at the moment. So I'll start by looking at how did we get here. Then we'll look at where here is. By looking at the UKCA requirements and CE requirements for Europe, a little bit on ISO 13485, which kind of underpins both of them, and then at the end just a bit on UK market access timelines, and then hopefully plenty of time for questions. So it's a very general overview of the regulations. It's hard to go into much detail in half an hour or 20 minutes, so I'll push through the slides, and then maybe if you want more detail we can open up the conversation later. So how did we get here? So before we say where we are, how did we get it? I think it's important to understand. So let's rewind 5 or 6 years before the pandemic, before Brexit. A CE mark, if you had one, allowed you to, well, firstly, it's a legal requirement, so you have to have a CE mark if you want to sell a medical device. It's not optional. But once you have that CE mark, it allowed you to trade or sell your medical device in all 28 member states of the European Union, so they're the ones in red, plus also Norway, Iceland, Switzerland and Liechtenstein, they're the blue ones, plus Turkey. And there was also mutual recognition with Australia, Taiwan and Saudi Arabia, who would recognise CE marking. So getting a CE mark for a medical device company, was a huge thing. It allowed you access to this market of 480 million people plus. And it was similar in how it works to FDA, but often was seen as a bit of a slightly easier, more manageable and predictable route to market. But then the first thing that happened, I guess, was Brexit, and the UK left the European Union and introduced almost immediately what they've called a UKCA mark to replace the CE mark. Albeit in the UK right now, we still recognise a CE mark that's been issued either previously or since we left. We'll still allow CE marked products to be sold in the UK. So what kind of happened was in the whole of Europe, we had what we call the previous Medical Devices Directive, which is the CE mark. Often called MDD for sort of shorthand, Medical Devices Directive. So this was in place when I joined BSI 12 years ago and has been since then. However, in the last few years in Europe, this has been upgraded to a new regulation, which is EU 2017-745, the Medical Device Regulation, or MDR as a sort of shorthand for that. So in Europe, they've moved from the old directive to the new regulation, and a couple of good reasons for that. One, medical devices had moved on since the original directive was written. There was new technology that hadn't even really been considered for the directive, like nanotechnology and software and a few other things. So, there was a need to encompass all this new technology. Plus, I guess some of the lessons learned from having a regulatory system, we've incorporated that into the new regulations as well. So that process of moving to the new regulation is ongoing. Most companies have either started it or have done it or in the process of moving their devices to the new CE marking, MDR regulations in Europe. However, in the UK, we are not moving currently to the new medical device regulation like the rest of Europe. What we did essentially is just rename the old directive UKCA, or its official title is actually UK MDR 2002 Part 2, but essentially UKCA. So what we've got now is that the UK is kind of operating under the old regulation, if you like, whereas most of Europe is now moving to this new regulation, and there are some differences between them, and that's what we'll kind of cover. So I think it's important to understand how the UK and Europe have kind of diverged a little bit in the last couple of years, certainly since Brexit. So right now in the UK, because we still accept a CE mark, you've got two options. You can either have a CE mark issued in Europe, and you can use that to access the UK market, and we'll be able to for a few more years. Or you can apply for a UK CA mark specifically just to allow you to sell in the UK only, and you can use that to access the UK market. So 2 options for the UK, either a CE mark or a UKCA, and in fact a lot of companies have got both, because it's, you know, you can have the specific requirements for the UK, but also you want to sell in Europe, you need to have a CE mark as well. Northern Ireland is as often a little bit of a special case, I guess. So there is a specific UK NICE mark for Northern Ireland, or Northern Ireland can use the CE mark. Now at BSI, we're not really offering the CE UK NI specific version. It would be too much for us to set up a huge scheme just for a handful of clients in Northern Ireland. So for us at BSI, if clients in Northern Ireland want to get on the market, we're offering a CE service. We're not specifically doing the UK CA Northern Ireland version of the regulations. That's just for several reasons, to do with more procedures in BSI than anything to do with the regulations. So UKCA overview first, because that's the UK one. And we'll go kind of back to basics. What does it cover? What does the regulation cover? And that's back to the question that I've told the team and Umar to ask everybody who contacts us. You know, is it a medical device? It's often not always clear what a medical device is and what should be covered. But the regulation has a pretty succinct definition, which you can see here. So a medical device is any instrument, apparatus, appliance, software, material, or other article intended by the manufacturer to be used for human beings for the purpose of diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, treatment, or alleviation of a disease, diagnosis, monitoring, treatment, alleviation, or compensation for an injury or handicap, or investigation, replacement, or modification of the anatomy or physiological process, and then a random one at the end, control of conception, and does not achieve its principal intended action by pharmacological means. In other words, it's not a drug, it's a device. So this definition can be, we share with clients, we ask them, tell us, what is your device doing? Is it treating? Is it preventing? Is it diagnosing? And what medical condition is it diagnosing? So really useful for just gauging whether your device or service or appliance should be classed as a medical device or not. So we look at some examples of medical devices, or are they medical devices? So from the top left, you've got a hip replacement, clearly a medical device. That's to replace part of your anatomy and fix it. Then you've got an MRI scanner, again used for diagnosis or monitoring or treatment pathways. The little metal thing, I'm sure some of you probably recognise it. That's a heart stent, or a stent that keeps your arteries open if they're getting blocked. So that, again, a medical device, alleviating a medical condition. Then you've got hearing aids, again, replacing a physiological process. If you can't hear very well, you get a device that can help you hear better. And then the last one along the top is some kind of dialysis machine. I mean, there's some hospital people on here who probably know better than me what that is. But again, that's to help with the treatment of certain medical conditions. So all clearly medical devices, but what you can see there is there's just a very big variety, even within those 5, of the type of device and how do you regulate things that are very different. A syringe is a medical device, but a syringe is very different to an MRI scanner, and obviously the regulations apply to all of these different device types. Then along the bottom, we've got a few that may or may not be medical devices. So the first one is a contact lens. So a contact lens that corrects vision is a medical device. It's treating, if you can't see very well, then the contact lens helps you to see better. But if it's just a contact lens that is a sort of decorative one that just changes the color of your eye or makes your eyes look like a tiger or whatever else they do these days, they're not correcting the vision. They're not a medical device, really. They're just a cosmetic device. And one of the changes from the UKCA regulation to Europe is, in Europe they've incorporated some of these cosmetic devices into the regulation. So right now in the UK, a coloured contact lens would not be regulated at all under the medical device regulations, but in Europe now it would be, because that's one of the changes they made, and they introduced these what they call medical devices without a medical purpose. So these are things that are like medical devices but don't have a medical purpose. And the challenge with some of those for us as a notified body is, when we're looking at a regular medical device, we look at the risk benefit profile. What's the risk of the device being used, but also what's the benefit to the patient? And we make an assessment looking at the manufacturer's information on that. Whereas for a non-medical device or a cosmetic device, there's some risk. There's always a level of risk for any of these things, but there's no medical benefit. So how do you measure what's an acceptable level of risk for a contact lens that doesn't actually correct your vision and has no medical benefit? And these are some of the things we've had to kind of work out as a notified body. The next one along is a medical device, but it's being used. See how well you can see that? It's a dog. I think it's upside down, the dog, or lying on its head. So that would not fall under the regulations, even though it's a medical device. It's not being used on a human, so it doesn't count. Then we've got a COVID test. That is a medical device, IVD test, but IVD is a kind of separate subset of medical devices that are treated differently and have their own regulation. And in fact, in BSI, there's a different team that looks at IVDs. Because they're not really treating a medical condition, they're providing test results essentially. So the different way of looking at the accuracy rather than the medical benefit. And then software as a medical device is definitely can be a medical device if it's meeting any of those criteria for monitoring, diagnosing, treating. And we'll look a bit at how that's kind of been treated in the two different regulations. So for BSI, we have 900 technical experts now looking at all these different types. We think there's about 500, 1,000 different types of medical device if you looked at all of them. So we divide them up into technology areas, and we have teams who specialize in different areas. So we have an orthopedic and dental team. We have an active implantable team who look at the really high risk stuff. So things that are not active devices are generally ones that have power, so either a battery or plugged in. So a device that has power has a bit of extra risk. A device that has power and is implanted into the body to keep your heart beating is about as high risk as it can get. Then we have regular active devices. So like I said, that's anything generally that has power. So all of the imaging things, syringe drivers, anything that's plugged in essentially or has a battery falls under the active device rules. IVDs, like I said, treated separately. They're all the tests. We have a vascular team who do everything to do with stents, catheters, guide wires, anything to do with the heart or the central nervous system. And then we have a general devices team who cover all of the other kinds of medical devices that might be out there, wound care, dressings, devices with animal tissue in them, contact lenses, ophthalmics, anything that doesn't fit into one of these other categories. So we kind of shape our expertise to fit the kind of products that are out there. When we're trying to assess whether a medical device is safe, to be able to do that, we need to have somebody in BSI who understands those medical devices, who knows how they work. And we only recruit technical experts who, one, have a scientific degree, but also have experience in industry, so have worked in industry, bringing products to market. So they have that view on what it is to bring a product to market, and then we kind of teach them the regulations that they can then apply to other companies. So it's a risk-based classification system for medical devices. There's lots and lots of different types, and we have from class 1 low risk devices up to class 3, which are high risk devices. So class 1 devices would be a wound dressing like a bandage or a plaster, pretty low risk. If it doesn't work properly, it's not really going to cause much damage. You just get a different one and try again. Then class 2A is sort of low to medium risk. So a syringe with a needle is slightly more risky than a bandage because the needle could snap off or maybe something could go wrong there. Contact lenses would be, again, low, medium risk. There's the risk of inducing infection into the eye. Hearing aid has a battery. The battery could melt or do something, leak out into your ear or whatever. So there's a whole range of kind of class 2A, medium, low, medium risk devices. Then class 2B is sort of medium to high risk. So we're going up another level here. So things like an infusion pump, which, if it works well, is fine. But obviously, if it fails, could have quite a serious impact for the patient who's using it. A CT scanner, again, it's providing information that's used for diagnosis, but also has magnetic or, MRI scanners have, radiation involved, a few other things we need to consider. And a blood bag, again, is sort of seen as quite high risk. You don't want to infect the blood as you kind of move it around the country. And then class 3 are the highest risk ones. These are generally things that are implanted in the body. So all the orthopedic devices, you know, hip replacements, any bit of metal that's kind of put into the body to fix you is class 3 high risk, because it's going to be in there a long time and it needs to work properly. Heart stents and anything to do with the vascular team generally is high risk, again, because it's one in the body, but also is, you know, performing a vital function to keep your blood moving and keep your heart pumping. So we will ask manufacturers to tell us whether they think it's low risk, medium risk or high risk, and that kind of determines the kind of nature of the review that we do and how much depth we go into. So the process for us as a notified body is, firstly, when we talk to a client, one, is it a medical device? Let's go through the definition and check with the client what they think. Then we need to determine the device classification, because that has an impact on how we do the review. So we ask the manufacturer to submit their rationale for whatever classification they've gone with, and we'll decide if we agree or not. Probably worth pointing out at this stage that as a notified body, so all notified bodies or approved bodies in the UK, we're not allowed to consult with clients. So we're not allowed to help them or tell them what to put or how to construct their technical files. We are the best analogy I've ever heard is we're like the driving test examiner. You come to us and take the test when you're ready. We don't teach you how to drive. So in this case, we don't tell you how to put your technical file together, or we don't tell you what classification your device should be. What we do is review what's presented to us and decide if we agree or not. So the client needs to assemble their technical documents to meet the essential requirements. We'll talk about those in a minute. Excuse me. And then we will do our review. So we will look at the technical file, we'll compare that to the regulation. We will do audits of their quality management system, because that's a part of the review. We'll look at the microbiology aspects if they have sterile devices, and we'll pull all that review work together. And if we're happy with it all, we send it to our own panel to check it, and then we can, you know, issue a declaration of conformity and issue a CE certificate. So the process for us is pretty straightforward. We get the documentation from the client, we review it against the regulation, we audit the client on site, and if you meet those requirements, then we can recommend you for certification. So in a little bit more detail, the technical file is the key thing for the review. So this is a document that's put together by the manufacturer that should have all the information in it to allow us to assess their product against the requirements of the regulation. We'll do the review of the file against the requirements of the regulation, and we will almost certainly have some questions. So we will go back to the client with a list of questions. It could be things we couldn't find. It could be we found some things, evidence, but we're not sure if it's valid, so we want more information. Or it could be some evidence that's been presented to us that we just don't agree with, and we're going to challenge the client to why we should accept it. So then we issue those questions, and then we wait. The company then has to kind of put together some responses to our questions. So that kind of response and, you know, question and answer cycle will perhaps go around 2 or 3 times of us asking questions and getting more information, hopefully to answer all those questions and finish the review. If we can't answer all the questions and there are gaps or things we don't agree with, then it's a fail, and the company would have to go away and try again with better information in the future. And a big part of what we look at is the clinical evidence. So, you know, if you're going to introduce a new implant, orthopedic implant, spine implant, for example, how can you tell, you know, how can you show to BSI that that's going to be safe for the lifetime of its use? What clinical trials have you done? What other devices is it similar to? What tests have you done? We expect to see all of that in the technical documentation. So if we've answered if the questions have been answered and we're happy you've met the requirements, we recommend a certification, and it goes to our panel. Now, in parallel to that technical file review, one of the requirements of UKCA or CE marking is that we have to have oversight of the company's quality management system. So there's essentially 2 things we look at. The device, is it safe? Does it do what it's supposed to do, or what you tell it as it does? And then we need to look at the company, and do they have the capability to reliably design and manufacture that device to the standard that's in the technical file. So the 2 kind of go hand in hand. We look at the device and make sure that's safe, but we also look at the company to see that they have the capability to do this, to manufacture that device and place it on the market. So that's done with an audit of their quality system, and what we hope to see is procedures in place to allow that to happen. Again, if both of them met, you pass the audits, you pass the technical review, we'll issue a 13.85 certificate and a UKCA certificate or a CE certificate, depending what's been applied for. So some of you are probably wondering certainly if there are any manufacturers on here, well, how much is this going to cost me and how long is it going to take? The answer is it's going to cost quite a lot, and it's probably going to take quite a bit of time. There's a lot to do. Ultimately, BSI are going to put their name on a certificate to say this device is safe, and that certificate lasts 5 years. We can't do that unless we've spent a lot of time making sure we're completely happy that that device is safe and does work as intended. So for medium risk devices, 2A and 2B, typically 8 to 10,000 per review. And if you've got similar products, we only need to review one file. We can apply that with a bit of sampling to other devices that are similar. For a class 3 device, high risk, typically 30 to 40,000 per device, we will spend 8 to 10 to maybe 12 days reviewing that device. There's a lot goes into it. We get clinical experts to look at it. We get statisticians to look at the data. We'll call on different bits of expertise within the BSI team as needed. So maybe 4 or 5 different people in BSI will look at that review at different stages. Plus, we have application fees to set things up. You're going to need some quality management systems audits, as we've discussed. And once you've got your certification, that's not the end of it. You have ongoing surveillance. We want to make sure that your quality system is fit for purpose for the lifetime of the company, and that the device is, being monitored in use once it's placed on the market. Timelines, 9 to 12 months. So once you've submitted the information to us, there's a bit of lead time, and the process generally takes up to a year to get through. So it's not particularly quick, but there's a lot to cover and a lot going on. So that's UKCA. If you want to sell in Europe, or you want to have a CE mark that you can use in the UK as well as Europe, then Europe has moved to the new regulation, MDR. So let's look a little bit at the differences to UKCA, how to obtain MDR and the costs. So I guess the first thing is MDR has new definitions of a lot of things. So this is just an example of where this is the MDR definition of some medical terms. What is a surgically invasive device? What is an active device? What's a reusable surgical instrument? And all of the red text is the extra bits that have been added on top of what was originally in the old directive. So if you imagine that the UK is the NDD column, in Europe, we're following the first column, which is MDR. So literally different definitions of terms that are used in the two systems. So again, we put some guides together so manufacturers can look at those differences. And again, big difference in continuous use, direct diagnosis, what's an implantable device. So lots of additions and changes and extra information in MDR that just are not covered in the old directive. And probably the biggest, I was going to go through all the different rules and classification rules, but actually most of them are just small changes and additions. The one that really has changed a lot is software, Rule 11. So there's a new software rule. So in the old directive, and therefore in UKCA right now in the UK, a lot of software as a medical device is class 1. Which means class 1 is the notified body doesn't get involved in class 1 devices. They're essentially self-certified. So you self-certify with the MHRA. You say, I've got a class 1 medical device. This is what it does, and I'm going to put my own CE mark on this device because it meets the requirements. And BSI don't get involved in that at all. Notified bodies only really get involved for 2A, 2B and upwards. But in the new regulation in Europe, they took a real look at software and really upgraded the classifications on it. So any software which is used to take decisions about diagnosis or therapeutic purpose is going to be 2A now, not class 1, unless those decisions might cause death or an irreversible deterioration of a person's health, in which case it might go up to a class 3. So, or if it's a serious deterioration of health, maybe a 2B. So from being class 1, self-certified, no notified body, essentially a few £100 to register your software as a medical device in the UK, that same device in Europe could be a class 2B or a class 3 and cost 20, 30, 40,000 pounds. In fact, if it's got an AI element, which we're seeing a lot more of now, we have to get AI experts in who don't come cheap, and that could pushing up to 60, 80,000 for a review. So software is the one that's really changed a lot, and but also is an area where we've seen a huge, increase in applications of software. Obviously, it's used in a lot of medical device areas now. So that's probably the one to watch for. Software has been upgraded. So one of the things that are looked at in the UKCA old directive, they were called the essential requirements, which was quite a good way of describing them. These are essential things that you have to follow. They've renamed them in the new regulation as GSPRs, General Safety and Performance Requirements. Not quite as essential, but still essential, really. You have to follow them all. And so there's lots of things in the directive or regulation you have to follow, but this is the first bit, really, is you have to go through this. So one, is the device safe? Literally the highest thing on the list. It needs to be safe. That's the main purpose of the notified bodies and the approved bodies. Does it perform as intended? So if you're telling the world that your device treats this medical condition, you have to be able to prove it and then show that it does it. And then the other one is state of the art, which is the ship sailing. So every now and then there's a kind of improvement in technology, and the state of the art of a particular treatment or medical device gets raised. And when you're bringing out a new medical device, it should not be worse than the current, state of the art. So if you're bringing out a new medical device, we want to at least be as good as what's already out there, if not better. So state of the art is used sometimes to say, well, this is, your new medical device is not as good as what's already out there, then we can't really put that through the regulation. Number 2, risk reduction as far as possible, which looks at 3 and 4, risk management, risk control, risk of user error. So the risk is obviously a big part of the safety. Has the manufacturer identified all the risks and all of the risks that are there? Have they taken steps to minimize the risks, and what have they done to minimize those risks? What's the likelihood of something happening, and what's the outcome if it does happen? So if it's a really high risk or serious thing could happen, you have to really reduce that risk as far as possible. And one of the things that we will not accept is a client saying, if they've got a risk and they say, well, could you reduce that risk? Could you do something to take away that risk? And yeah, but the device would be too expensive then, or it would cost too much money to do that. That's not a valid reason not to reduce the risk, lack of money or the cost of it. We would expect them to reduce the risks across the board as much as possible, and then to explain to us what they've done and how they manage that. Number 6, lifetime. So like I said about the implants, if you've got an implant, I've got one, I'm sure a few people have broken bones and had screws and plates. That's going to be in your body for the next 30, 40 years for your lifetime. So we need to make sure that the devices are safe, not just when they're placed on the market, but safe for the lifetime of use of the device. Number 7 is packaging and transport. So again, making sure it's packaged and transported in a way that maintains the integrity of a product. So that's particularly for sterile devices. Maybe you have to be packaged in a certain way, or temperature controlled devices and so on. Number 8, undesirable side effects minimized, and the risks and the benefits are looked at. So yeah, if there are side effects, is that worth it for the benefit of the product? Okay. Excuse me. Then we've got a few other things: chemical properties, biological properties, infection and microbial contamination. So keeping devices that are supposed to be sterile, maintaining that sterility. Any devices that have a medicinal substance as part of it that's absorbed into the body, we have to look then at that medicinal substance, and that pushes up quite often simple devices up to a class 3 high risk. If you're introducing a medicinal substance into the body, you're immediately a class 3 device. And the list of medicinal substances is quite large and covers things like silver. So if you've got wound dressings with silver on, I used to work for a wound care company. That was the big thing about 10, 15 years ago, dressings with silver. Silver's a medicinal substance. Those wound dressings immediately became class 3 because you're introducing something into the body. Even simple ointments and creams, if they have aloe vera in them, which they often do because they want to make it smell nice, aloe vera is classed as a medicinal substance. Your simple, earwax removing cream or whatever you put in your ears is suddenly a class 3 device, the same risk as a heart valve, because you've got this medicinal substance in it. Same with materials of biological origin, again, high risk if you're introducing biological substances into the body. And then I guess they took the opportunity to bring in environmental impacts as well, which weren't really covered in the original directive. So how are you making the devices? Are you making sure they're environmentally friendly? And then a few others, diagnostics and protection against radiation. So these are just making sure all these devices are safe. As I mentioned earlier, one of the big things in the new regulation is clinical evidence has changed. So in the old days, as I would call them, you'd quite often want to use equivalents. So our device is like this other device that's already on the market, has already been certified. Therefore, if we can show we're equivalent to that device, you used to be able to get CE marking or FDA approval based on somebody else's product, essentially. And there are clearly risks to that, especially if that original review had some flaws. You could end up having 30 other devices all off the same potentially flawed review. So the clinical evidence we want is generally a literature review, so do some research, but really what we want is a clinical investigation, do a clinical trial, show us it works on real people in real settings. And that data that's provided, whether it's a literature review, whether it's a clinical trial, must be sufficient to demonstrate safety, performance, and the risk benefit. And essentially, equivalence was removed by this one article that's in the regulation that says for high-risk devices, equivalence can only be claimed with one of your own devices, not with somebody else's. So essentially, only if you've got your own device that is similar could you use that. Or if you want to use another manufacturer's device, you have to have a contract in place with that other manufacturer that allows you access to all their data on an ongoing basis, which obviously if it's a competitor is not going to happen. So equivalence kind of, because of this rule, has almost been removed. You now have to do your own investigation and your own review. So UK MDR, CE marking in Europe, costs and timelines a bit similar. It's just more expensive. It takes longer. In simple terms, the medical device directive was about 1/2 inch thick. If you printed it off and put it on the table, the MDR regulation, the new one, is about 2 inches thick. There's 10 times as many pages in it, much more for a notified body to cover. The reviews just take longer. So whereas for an old medical device directive review of a class 2A device might take us a couple of days, under MDR that would be 4 to 6 days. So we always give a range because we're not quite sure exactly how long it will take, but almost double the amount of time. So for 2As and 2Bs and in CE marking, typically the cost is going to be 20 to 30,000 per device. Class 3s, 40 to 70,000 is not unusual for class 3 device. That could be a 12-day review, plus application fees, plus the QMS audits, plus all the other ongoing stuff. So again, similar timeline. It's the same people doing UKCA and MDR reviews, and typically still takes 9 to 12 months. Just quickly then, okay, I'm just looking at the time. So ISO 13485 is the quality management system standard for medical devices. If you've come across ISO 9001, it's essentially the same. It's just aimed specifically at medical device manufacturing companies. So if you read the regulation, one of the chapters early on, chapter 3 or clause 3, quality system, the manufacturer of the medical device must lodge an application for assessment of his quality system with the notified body. So essentially it's telling us we have to do an audit of their quality management system, and that audit has to be to the standard of ISO 13485. So it's a key part of what we do in the regulation. So whereas the technical file, you send it to us and we review it remotely on the, against the requirements. A 1345 audit is on site. We want to visit your location and we want to see your processes in action to see that they work. It's a 2-stage process, a 1345 audit. So stage 1, we come in for 1 day, we take an overview of the quality system, we make sure we understand what the company is doing, we make sure they're ready to go through the rest of the audit, we look at the scope of their certificate and make some planning kind of activities to plan what we do. Stage 2 is when we do the full review, really. So have you effectively implemented your quality system, and do you have evidence to show us that you're using the quality system and that it works? So we go around the factory or the site or the HQ, show us your procedures, show us the evidence that you're using these procedures. We want to see it all working in practice, and we want to make sure that you have the capability to design products and to manufacture them to the right standard. And that probably brings us on to a key principle of a lot of companies are virtual, so they have other people will make the products for them. They're not doing it all themselves. They'll outsource lots of things, and that's okay. So we have a kind of phrase that's in the regulation called the legal manufacturer. So the legal manufacturer is the company that has the CE certificate and has their name on the product as the manufacturer. It doesn't always mean they're the ones who physically make it. They might get somebody else to make it for them. So we will look at the quality management system of the legal manufacturer to make sure they've got procedures in place to manage that process. We will also want to know which subcontractors they're using, and we want to give some kind of oversight of them as well. So what we don't want is a company saying, you know, your medical device failed, it caused harm to some patients, and then they go, well, it wasn't us, that somebody else does that bit, you know, another company sterilizes it, so it's not our fault. They have to take responsibility. It's their device. So even if they're getting other people to do things on their behalf, the ultimate responsibility lies with the legal manufacturer to control those processes. So a 13.5 has a scope, so this just explains what we do. So you can have design and manufacture or development of a medical device for the purpose of whatever it's doing. And the reason we have quite a vague scope, not a vague scope, but a scope that covers, we don't just list devices, is we want to allow that quality system to adapt and move as the company goes forward, and they can add new products that still fit under this definition. Costs and timelines for 13.5 audit. If you make a CE or a UKCA application, this will be done in parallel, so it's not afterwards, it's done at the same time. Cost depends on the number of employees. Small companies, less cost. Bigger companies, more cost. Typically takes sort of 6 months to get the stage 1 and stage 2 done, and then a few months later. So that will always fit within the timeline of an application for CE or for UKCA. You can split them up if you want to do 13.5 first and then make your application for CE or UKCA in the future. That's also fine, but generally we'll do them in parallel. Okay, last couple of slides. So UK market access. So you can use your CE mark or your UKCA mark to access the UK. And there's some now timelines on how long you can have this for. So if you currently have a UKCA certificate, you can keep it essentially for 3 years or until the 30th of June 2028, or when the certificate expires. So there's some timelines there. If you have a CE mark under the EU directives, say 2028 or 2030, depending on the certificate expiry. And if you have a CE mark under the EU regulations MDR, that's 5 years. So if you've got an MDR CE certificate, you can place that on the market in the UK using your CE certificate until June 2030. In terms of the sort of UKCA, you know, it's either 2028 or 2030, will depend on the classification. So it kind of goes up. The high risk ones we want sooner, the low risk devices you get longer. And I believe that's it. So it was a pretty quick whiz through the regulations. I'm happy to take questions. In fact, I'll stop sharing so we can all maybe see each other. So with me. Okay.
And you're on mute.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Damon, thank you very much for that. We're going to just pass over to Jane just now, who's going to facilitate the questions and answers. There have been some coming in during the course of your presentation, so hopefully we won't put you in the spot too much, but I'll just pass over to Jane just now.
We should have time just for a couple of quick questions just now. If there's any further questions that anyone has, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us after the event and we'll be able to forward that on to the right person. The first one I have just now is Damon and Umar, in relation to your slide regarding reviewing devices, how does this work for prosthesis and orthosis?
Okay, yeah. So so there are, again, this is one thing that changed in the new regulation. So in the old directive, which is obviously still UKCA, custom-made devices are not covered because we can't regulate something that's different every time. There's no consistency. So if they're custom-made, they're just not covered by the regulations in the UK right now. In Europe and the new MDR, the new regulation, they did bring in custom-made devices because it seemed wrong to exclude them. So the way it's done for if it's custom made is we look at their quality system. So rather than looking at the safety and performance of the device, because it'll be different every time, we make sure that their quality system is sufficient to allow them to do those different versions each time. If it's a regular, you get 5 different sizes of orthotic implant or whatever it is, that's still just classed as a medical device with different sizes. But if it's custom made, right now in the UK, not covered in the regulations, similar to cosmetic devices, but in Europe it is covered under what's called the custom made devices. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you. The next,
I was just going to say, if it's orthotic insoles, which we've come across a few times, they're class 1 low risk. I mean, you've got to look at the risk of a device. If it's just something that goes in your shoe to change the shape of your foot, it's not going to be a high risk device, probably self-certified, to be honest.
Great, thank you. The next one I have is quoting ISO 13485 as the QMS. Should this not be BS 13485 2021, which is different due to unique NZ annex? Can you ask Damon's view, please?
So we generally use EN, which is the European one, EN 13485. What was it, BS 13485? Oh, sorry, Jane, you're on mute. I missed that.
Sorry. Yeah, BS 13485 2021.
I'll have to get back to you on that. It's not something that we've been kind of told about yet. We normally just do the 2016 version of ISO is sufficient for most applications. There are some specific ones. One of the articles is to do with distributors and importers, which has a slightly different 13485 because you've got to look at their capability as an importer or distributor, and it has to cover certain things. So I don't know if it's related to that. But yeah, I'll take that one and perhaps come back to you on that one.
Great. Yeah, I'll should just have time for one more, and then I think we'll just have to wrap up. And any other ones we can answer afterwards. This one we have here is, if a company is applying for CE approval, is there any benefit to applying for UKCA at the same time?
Maybe is the answer, which is the answer to a lot of things, or it depends is our favourite answer. But so I guess there's a couple of ways of looking at it. One, if you apply for them both at the same time, we can do one audit and cover both requirements, and all we need, because the medical device regulation is bigger, it covers almost everything that was in the original UKCA directive, so we don't need to do a lot of extra work to combine them. We can do one review. It's essentially an extra half a day to do both together. If you separate them, then you have to have 2 reviews and all that. Maybe we reduce the time a bit, but we'd still have to have those 2 separate reviews. So I don't think there's, in terms of, do you need both? Not really. I think if you've got a CE mark, you can sell in the UK and Europe. You don't really need to have a UKCA mark, but equally you can get a UKCA mark now quite easily, and maybe in a few years when the UKCA regulation comes in, properly, when it gets changed in a couple of years, maybe it won't be as easy then. So there's maybe again an advantage to getting a UKCA certificate now that will last 5 years, where it's still a bit easier to get it because it's all kind of based on the old directive, but not much advantage other than it saves a bit of auditing time or review time if you do them together. And again, as a notified body, we don't mind, as long as you're following a regulation and you're doing things properly. We don't mind if you do them together, separate, as long as you're meeting the requirements. We would never say to a manufacturer, you should do this or you should do that. It's just, here are the options. You decide which is the best for you commercially or logistically or whatever. So
Great, thank you. I think that's all the time we have just now for questions, just conscious of the time. But I know there's been a few others, so we'll be able to get back to those individually, whether it's for Damon, Umar, Elaine. We can, Elaine will share our contact details and stuff at the end there, and we'll be able to forward them on. So I'll just pass over to Elaine just now to wrap up.
Oh, I was just going to say, can we just, Umar's got one thing to say, because we've got an event coming up soon, which may be of interest to some of the members.
Yeah, thanks, Damon. Elaine, Jane, I'll keep it very brief. Hello, everyone. I'm hoping you can all see me. We are hosting a Meet the Experts event. So if anyone wants to seek further knowledge and a better understanding on the whistle-stop tour on regulation Damon's just taken us through, then we are hosting Meet the Experts event in our Milton Keynes office on April 16th. If you're able to get down there, it would be great to see you there. And we'll have some industry experts from our approved body, our notified body, talking about the current landscape, what's happening in the future, some of the buzz topics like AI that Damon was referring to. And I was fortunate enough to press our marketing team to get some free tickets. So if any of you, I think there's about 5 free tickets up for grabs on a first come, first serve basis. If anyone is interested and is willing to get down to Milton Keynes, then please reach out to Elaine or Jane, and I'll be sure to make sure we can get the necessary links and everything sent across to yourselves. So that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Umar. It's going to be a much more in-depth view than I've just given you, and it'll be from the real experts.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much, Umar and Damon. We really appreciate you coming along and to get a completely different perspective on what's going on. We've actually had a lot more questions than we had time to answer. So
yeah, I'm happy to jump into the chat after this, and if I can answer them quickly, I will. But if not, please send them, and we'll get back to you at some point.
That's great. Thank you very much. So just to conclude, this is part of a series of webinars that we run. Our next webinar is going to be in May 2024. We're taking a break in April. This one will be based on AI in healthcare, and in particular some of the IP issues, and there's been particular, I think, court judgments made quite recently, so we'll perhaps have some information and have some experts along that can give their opinion. All of our past webinars are available on demand, and we've just given a list of the webinars, and you can pick them up at that web address. And finally, just a bit of PR for InnoScot Health. You are able to book a consultation with one of our innovation managers if there's anything you want to discuss. So the web address is there. And if you, particularly because we have such a large NHS audience, if you have an idea for a new innovation that you would like to discuss, then please get in touch with us at innoscot.com. And finally, thank you all very much for attending. Thank you, Damon and Umar, for your presentation and for your expertise. It's really appreciated. These are our contact details, and we do publish a newsletter. So if you want to subscribe to the newsletter, there's a QR code that you can scan. So I will just conclude there and thank everyone again for attending.
Thank you.